St. Paul has a feeling for old things. I loved coming in just to mail my letters when I was downtown.
There are relatively few buildings in American cities that you can walk into and get a sense of the big, important aspirations of people a long time ago who were making a building that they intended to last for centuries.
One of the things that struck me very early, and I'm still awed by, is the craftsmanship in the building. I think of the artisans that were working in St. Paul in the late 19th century and the early years of the 20th century. And so you just know how terribly, terribly irreplaceable it is.
Irreplaceable? Perhaps not.
Dear Omar, you might consider me the luckiest chap ever set foot in America. I found employment in St. Paul, Minnesota, working for the U.S.
1 century ago, all federal activities for the state of Minnesota took place in a single St. Paul building.
Please send news from home. Your friend Lyle.
Over time, the building would become an historic landmark. The birth of a city is neither glamorous nor romantic. It is messy, practical, haphazard, sporadic. And so it was with the twin cities of St. Paul and Minneapolis. By 1890, the Twin Cities are the Midwest center for river traffic, railroad terminals, flour milling, immigration, banking, and government. The frontier no longer exists. Population growth and industrial progress is accompanied by an increase in the work of the federal government. The simple system of the area's first official postmaster, Henry Jackson, must expand rapidly to keep pace with the needs of area residents. A large new federal building on 5th and Wabasha is outgrown in just 10 years.
Like every growing city in the United States that had a federal presence, there were congressmen who wanted to get a nice little project going in their town and get a new big federal building constructed. So this was one of, I believe, 7 or 8 major federal buildings that was authorized in the early 1890s, fortunately just before the Great Depression of 1893, because after that the government funds dried up for about a decade. So it was a federal project designed to really meet the expanding needs of the federal government in St. Paul by providing a post office, courtrooms, and office space.
The federal building was put on Rice Park, which meant that it was always in a place where it could be seen. It's on this very funny piece of land that kind of angles back into a triangle. The building doesn't do that. The building is, you know, full rectangular building, but it's on this funny piece of land that sort of closes in on it. So in many ways it feels like the spaces around it are kind of hugging the building in a way that most buildings don't generate that sort of feeling.
Although eclectic in design, the building's primary design style is Richardsonian Romanesque, named for architect Henry Hobson Richardson. His groundbreaking new style features a massive stone foundation, arched window groupings, low-slung symmetrical entrances. The Romanesque North Tower, added in 1908, is an identical copy of the tower on Boston's Trinity Church, one of Richardson's best-known works. During the same time period, the Chateauesque style, named for the chateaux of France, is also popular. It features an asymmetrical plan, smoothly finished walls, and small round towers called tourelles.
Easiest way to understand that comparison, if you went and looked at Minneapolis City Hall, which is a pure bore Richardsonian Romanesque building, very heavy, very massive, very powerful looking building, kind of scares you to look at it, you know, like government's going to do something bad to you if you walk inside. But this building has a lighter quality to it. I call it sort of jolly Romanesque, with all the little tourelles or little turrets up there, the very picturesque roof line. It's People in St. Paul often liken it to their fairy tale castle.
The U.S. Treasury's supervising architect, with typical government insight and forethought, determines that the prudent approach to design is standardization.
It was interesting. The building was one of about 6 similar buildings. And this one has been considered the best of the 6, one in Detroit, one in Omaha. The Washington, D.C. one is very similar but much larger.
What distinguishes Landmark Center from all these buildings, and I've seen the post office in Washington and in Milwaukee, is its siting on the park. There's not another of these buildings that I've seen that has such a spectacular site with the building fronting on this park.
The interior of St. Paul's Federal Building is also unique. Gas and electric chandeliers, marble fireplaces, Corinthian capitals, carved mahogany woodwork, exquisitely detailed courtrooms, on May 5th, 1902, all postal employees sing Auld Lang Syne in unison at the old Federal Building on 5th and Wabasha, before marching behind the post office band to their new offices. The new Federal Building is open for business.
Dearest Flo, please give my love to all in Malmo. I'm so relieved that the end of the war is near. The good news is that I am now a Mrs. Please toast to my happiness with a glass of champagne. Where you are, there is no law against it. Write soon. Love, your sister, Leela.
The history of Landmark Center is that the Prohibition Amendment was written by Andrew Volstead of Granite Falls, Minnesota, a Republican who officed in the 5th floor of Landmark Center. So literally the whole nationwide experiment in teetotaling was created here in St. Paul and Landmark Center.
Ironically, it is the Volstead Act, commonly known as the Prohibition Amendment, that launched an entire bootlegging industry.
At the turn of the century, the chief of the St. Paul Police, John J. O'Connor, he was nicknamed the Big Fellow because the chief was about 6'3" and quite portly. He sent the word out to criminals all over America, come to St. Paul. As long as you're on your best behavior, which means don't kill anybody or rob anyone within the city limits of St. Paul, you, Mr. Dillinger, Mr. Barker Karpus, are welcome here in our city. Well, that deal collapsed and started to collapse in 1933 when the Barker Karpus gang kidnapped the millionaire William Ham of the Ham Brewery.
The Ham Brewery in St. Paul, where William Ham, 39-year-old president, was spirited into a car by kidnappers as he walked from his office to his adjoining home on the hill. After 4 days as a prisoner, Mr. Ham now rests safely at his residence. It cost nearly $100,000 to free him. Here is Mr. Ham. His was the 4th kidnapping in St. Paul in 18 months.
We're mighty glad to have you back, Mr. Ham. Well, I'm certainly very glad to be back, too.
Ma Barker uses Ham ransom money to throw a big party for her boys at a cabin on White Bear Lake. The same gang is also thought to be responsible for kidnapping Edward Bremer, a St. Paul banker.
Alvin Karpus, better known as Alvin Creepy Karpus, was finally captured in New Orleans by J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI and brought here to the Federal Courts Building. Some of the stories that Karpus told in his autobiography is that he was chained to a radiator. Karpus called it like an animal. here in Landmark Center. Karpus was kept in the detention room on the 3rd floor just before he was brought into Judge Joyce's courtroom, which is room 317. Because Karpus was such a notorious kidnapper, there were machine gun wielding FBI agents filling the room. And as Karpus stood there being accused of the Ham kidnapping, Karpus waved his hat over his face. Everybody else was just melting in the heat, and Karpus said, "I might as well plead guilty rather than sit here in this stinking, sweaty courtroom for 3 weeks." And Karpus pled guilty and went to prison, eventually to Leavenworth and Alcatraz, for longer than any of the other gangsters who were convicted in this building.
Hi, Ralph. You say nothing exciting ever happens here in Minnesota? Not true. Today, the trial of Evelyn Frechette began. She's the girlfriend of public enemy #1, John Dillinger. Can Milwaukee top that? Love, sis.
Although gangster trials are dramatic, the Federal Building is also the setting for scores of daily life transactions.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same.
Military inductions, citizenship, arraignments, bankruptcy proceedings, the annual Christmas postal rush. It is also the place for distinguished judicial careers, federal court cases, and landmark decisions. The Federal Building often acts as a public forum for gatherings which spill over into Rice Park. 2 U.S. presidents, like everyone else, are required to crawl unceremoniously through a 2nd-floor window to speak from the balcony overlooking 5th Street. Over time, the Federal Building is altered to modernize, repair, or improve. The Corteil skylight is covered with corrugated cement asbestos. A 2-story courtroom is cut in half horizontally, thereby creating a new courtroom. Fluorescent lighting replaces incandescents. Each year, more and more interior walls are covered with Government Green No. 102A. The tenants once again outgrow their building.
And as the activities of the federal government expanded, particularly through the 1930s with the Depression and all the programs that were invented, spaces had to be created to make those things happen. And so this was the place that all those things were shoved into.
The rooms were obviously capable of being resplendent, but they were not in any good shape at all. And the ceiling over the post office really ugly when you got upstairs to the 2nd floor. Up in the North Tower and the South Tower, before the restoration, it was the pigeons that occupied the tower for a long time. And the roof was terrible. There had been leakage. It was a mess.
The philosophy was tear the old buildings down and build new ones. And it wasn't until, I think, this building was put in jeopardy that the City Council and the Board of County Commissioners realized that it was a mistake to tear down buildings merely because of their age.
Unfortunately, in Minneapolis, the demolition of its own historic landmark, the Metropolitan Building, was approved by all concerned.